Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Rule the Roost podcast. The dust has settled. The season is over. All that malarkey. Well, it's not actually over yet because we've got a game on Wednesday. So tomorrow at the time of recording, which is kind of bizarre, but I'm sure we'll get into that. And to get into that with me is Mr. Adam Nathan. Welcome back. How are you doing, mate?
Thank you very much. Yeah, looking forward to talking about it. All is good. Thank you. It's a stressful last month, isn't it? When there's so many things going on. One of my friends has definitely made himself ill, stressing about Arsenal so much, and I think he needs at least a couple of weeks off. So, yeah, time to relax a little bit. Thank God.
The funny thing is, didn't you feel like on that note that look, I know we are going to get into the kind of the season in a sort of review fashion in a more sort of binary sense, but just as we reflect at the top here, yeah, okay, I know the last sort of month or two of the season wasn't particularly great for Spurs, but as soon as Arsenal didn't win the league, I suddenly just looked at what we'd done this season, Postecoglou's first season, through kind of fresh eyes and just thought, wasn't actually that bad. Dare I say it was actually quite good as a first season, really.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that. Yeah, I don't know how roundabout you want to go on this, but if you can find me any pundit in the mainstream media that was predicting Spurs to finish fifth, I haven't found one yet. Now, obviously, goalposts do move as the season progresses, and we're better than expected, then a bit worse than expected at times. But from a 35,000 feet view, I think it's pretty hard to be too disappointed about anything that Spurs have achieved this year based on initial expectations, which do have to come into it in some capacity, particularly the day before the season when obviously Kane's flogged and not really replaced at all.
It's nice, isn't it, that we managed to go into this Sheffield United game having come off the back of that sort of Man City result, the weirdness, the tension, if you like. I think we can use that word. I don't think that's too, inflammatory to say. The sort of tension surrounding that fixture with the manager, with the fans, with maybe the playing staff too. To just go in and do the job against Sheffield United. We've had those horror fixtures, haven't we, at the end of the season? Newcastle away, most notably. We had Chelsea breathing down our neck. I'll be brutally honest. I wasn't, I much would have preferred being in the Europa League, but even if we were in the Conference League, my position wouldn't have changed on. I just want Spurs to win it, one of those next year. I think they are both winnable. I copped a bit of stick for saying that on my last pod, saying that Europa League is winnable. I'm not saying we're going to turn up and just kind of piss the competition, but I think it is winnable, right? But still, I mean, to my point, I'm sure you were just as pleased, right, to see Spurs go into a fixture that we should have won and won it pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I think the Burnley game as well. Like Ange was so forthright for so long, saying that it's not necessarily about where we finish. It's about, can I see signs of progress? Is the team moving in the right direction? And whilst I'm completely fine missing out on Champions League football, I think it would have been a hard one to reconcile if we'd had this dreadful run and hadn't beaten Burnley and Sheffield United. Because at that point, you're looking at it and thinking, well, what is happening? Because that would have been 8 or 7 losses on the spin to 2 easily relegated teams. And I think just being able to see the green shoots of, 2 good wins, performances that we did play well, certainly once the game settled down and we managed to wrestle control and play the football that we want to. I think they're 2 quite important wins for the belief going into the summer that things are going to be all right and the club is moving in the right direction. I think had we ended up coming 7th from the position that we were in, it would have been hard for you to look at what Ange had said all season and think, this is right.
Were you concerned at all? Are you disappointed, shall we say, that we didn't really turn up in any of those games against let's leave Manchester City aside for now, but those other fixtures, obviously the North London derby at home, Chelsea away, Liverpool away, we showed up for half a game, but at that point we're 3-4-0 down. Was 3-0 down? Yeah. Is that bothersome to you? How the season did end, really?
A little bit. I think the way the fixtures ended up being skewed, obviously Chelsea should have been in February. City should have been, a month or so beforehand. And I think I mentioned to you last week that I do think that between January and April, we didn't really have any big games. Like we played Man United on the 14th of Jan, then we had City in the Cup in the last weekend of January. But February and March, if you look at the teams we played, yeah, Spurs wanted to get in the Champions League, and we beat Villa, and that was great. But I don't think the previous 2 months prepared us for how much of a step up in quality we were going to face in April and May. That might be me being too generous, but I think we had so many of the lower teams at home that we got ourselves through, and they were good, exciting performances at times, a bit drab at other times. But all of a sudden, you're pitching up, and you've got this run of the big boys, and I think it almost felt like the season was coming to an end mentally. I think most of the fans thought that really, and we were going to have this run. But once fifth place was sort of sealed, I think a lot of people were quite content with that. And I don't think we were on the beach as such, but I don't think we were at it mentally in the same way that we had been sort of up until the end of January, where we really had to focus the minds to grind out performances.
I've been pretty critical of Postecoglou in the past sort of month or so, and it's led to a few people in the comments and such saying that you obviously don't rate him and things like that, and that's not actually true. I like what we're doing. I like where we're going. So please bear that in mind when I ask this next question. Do you think his comments about not basically saying I'm not really that bothered if we finish in the top four or not, it's not particularly important to me, as much as I know there's a greater context around what he means there, what the sentiment is to that, as in, I don't view that as success, I view winning the league as success, all well and good. Do you think his inability to see how bad the optics of a statement like that are is, number one, worrying, and number two, do you think that's had part of an effect on this not quite on the beach, but sort of on the beach type vibe we've had towards the tail end of the year? Because I'm not 100% sure if I agree with that or not, just to be upfront on that. Because there's a part of me that thinks, well, the players should still be able to motivate themselves somewhat, right? To want to play in the Champions League. Yeah,
I think a lot of the seasons where we were qualifying right at the death for the Champions League, invariably it was Arsenal we were pipping. Mm-hmm. And I think that brought on a lot more of the passion and desire to get it, because it was the twofold benefit of, yes, we're in this mythical competition, and also we've got one over our rivals. I never really felt much of an appetite for being desperate to finish above Aston Villa to be in the Champions League that we'd probably be eliminated from in a dodgy playoff after the group stages or something. The thought of being able to approach a Europa League with a younger squad who probably aren't up for 8 additional mega group games at this stage, that probably fills me with a bit more optimism than, I think we'd be looking at our squad now if we had Champions League football next season and thinking, there's a lot of holes to fill. Whereas with the Europa League, I think you can say, can Bergvall play some games? Are you going to be able to play Ashley Phillips at centre half in a couple of the games? And I think from a natural progression standpoint, we've spent so long trying to jump steps at Spurs, I think, and leapfrog what looks like a sensible rise and a sensible process of how to go from a good team to a better team to a great team. And there's part of me that does think that having that more linear progress of being in the Europa League next year might do us the world of good, as opposed to scrambling around in the Champions League, where every game, both League and Champions League, feels like this event. I was never fussed about the Champions League, and so maybe that's just because I'm overly pro Ange, and I'll get my comeuppance if he's sacked in November when it all goes Pete Tong. But for me, I was pretty comfortable with what he was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I there is something in what you say in terms of like the linear progression as well, because it doesn't feel like the team is. I don't think we've got the squad for the Champions League, and I don't think the team is ready yet mentally. I think that the tail end of this season has shown that, and it's the sort of thing you can be easily derided for by, I know there's going to be bad faith discussion from opposition fans, so I'm not really bothered about that. But there's going to be other Spurs fans that will say, you idiot, why would you rather be in the Europa League than the Champions League? But I do honestly think that weight, that expectation on, let's be honest, a pretty young squad, a squad that is still clearly learning. Postecoglou said that himself at the end of this season, hasn't he? That there's still a long way to go. Everybody still needs to buy into it. I think having that pressure of Champions League could be detrimental to us. But equally, some people might say that that would be a baptism of fire, wouldn't they? But I'm not so sure on that. I'm definitely more comfortable being in the Europa League at this stage. But make no mistake, I'm comfortable here because I don't want to say expect, but I really do want and think that Spurs should be able to make a really good fist of winning this competition. Yeah, there are some other good teams in there. We draw somebody like a Roma or something like that in the quarterfinals, semi-finals. Of course, that's going to be a game for Spurs. It's on paper, right? Yeah, we're probably a better side than Roma, a stronger team nowadays, but you know what the kind of atmosphere is around these showpiece fixtures and stuff. So, like I say, I'm not saying Spurs are going to show up and just win this, but I do think there is, I will say expectation that Spurs should make a good fist of this. And I do hope that Postecoglou goes into this competition thinking that he doesn't throw it, essentially. I don't think he would, but I can't be... The thing is, I'll be honest, I can't trust him entirely not to. I mean, how do you feel about it, given, as you said, you're overly pro Ange?
Well, my sense is that having more games in the group stage should give the better teams the advantage, because, in that Conference League season, which was obviously a complete disaster, we didn't even play all 6 games. Once we'd lost to Mura away or whatever it was.
Please don't.
And Vitesse Arnhem, I think we lost to, or maybe drew. But you basically gave up all of the leeway that you had to qualify. Whereas I think I'm right in saying that 8 teams qualify automatically, and then teams 9 to 24 have a playoff against each other to make up the other 8 teams. So there do feel like a number of backstops in place to help the better teams qualify, because if you make a pig zero in the group stage, at least you've still got a 2-legged playoff that hopefully, you wouldn't think there are going to be 9 better teams than us in the competition, or 8 teams
You'd
better.
Hope not, wouldn't you?
You'd be disappointed, I think. Something would have gone wrong in recruitment this summer, I think, if that happens. So I feel like the way they've structured it, and it's obviously that's what they wanted to do, because they want to create as many big games in the Champions League and Europa League as possible. They've structured it where the better teams should have a couple more mishaps that you can mitigate, which might work out in our favour. But God, look, we'll see. I think someone it might have been Charlie Eccleshare saying that, people think that Europa League game is going to be great fun. Then you rock up and it's Sanchez, Mora, Lamela and Llorente, for the sake of argument, playing, and you think, oh, this isn't fun at all. But the squad that you imagine will have going forward into the next season, even the second 11, if that's got Bissouma, Bentancur, Richarlison, Dragishin, you'd think there'd be enough quality players in there straight away for it to be an enjoyable watch.
I think it's Bywal. I think is the pronunciation. Bergman,
is it?
As we call it. Bywal, I think is... Yeah, as I've seen some Swedes say.
Oh, I heartily apologise to our Swedish brothers.
But you'd expect... I can't remember which one of the journalists it was. One of them was saying yesterday on Twitter that the sentiment around Spurs is that Bywal is going to be... he's a first-teamer. We're signing him to play as a part of the first team. He won't be going into the reserves or the under-20s or under... What is it? Is it under-20s, I think we play?
I think they've got every year. I think
club
they've got
football,
their own.
something like that, isn't it? And maybe even, your Mikey Moores, players like that coming through could, see some time in the Europa League. To the Sheffield United game, I don't think there's an awful lot to talk about from that, other than one thing, which is that we saw Kulusevski playing in this kind of central false 9, I want to say, role. And he actually did really quite well. Do you think that could be? Do you think there might be room to run with that? Because I think we've had this problem with Kulusevski a little bit this season. like you say, you're sort of an overly apologetic Ange fan. I'm probably an overly apologetic Kulusevski fan. I don't think he's been entirely right for this system. I don't know if he has the correct physicality for it, but I think he is of a certain quality that even Postecoglou has found it hard to jettison him from the team. I think he's tried really hard to make it work for him. And I'm assuming that's because he sees the quality that he possesses. And I think we've seen that he has a certain quality and he has a genuine work ethic, I think. A lot of the time when he plays, I think about the period when, after the Chelsea game, when we had injuries and people on international duty and everything like that, I feel like Kulusevski did a lot of work. He did a lot of labour for the team. And I just wonder if this falls on this central role for him. It might be a way of cracking it, or equally, it might just be that we did it last game of the season because there was nobody else available and we won't see it really happen again. But did you like it? I mean, what do you think about him as a player as well, anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I was saying for the previous 3 or 4 games of the end of the season, that's where he should be playing, just because. Do you remember that well, obviously everyone remembers, but that Luton away game when we had 10 men after Basuma got sent off, he basically got shoved centre forward with 2 banks of 4 and just told to hold the ball up and run channels. And he did like a really good job. And when you see Spurs teams going up to Newcastle and playing, Son, Johnson and Werner as a front 3, I mean, what do you expect to happen with that? The ball's just going to come straight back at you every time. And I've been talking with some mates about this today, that whilst this mythical 6 issue does seem to be one that we do need to solve, I think a massive problem of our play this year is that we've been getting the ball forward quickly, but not being able to retain it high up the pitch. So as all the team are moving forward to try and set the structure up to attack, we're losing it. And then it's just one quick ball over the top because everyone's running forward and they're just being bypassed by a quick pass and they can't change direction quickly enough. And someone like Kulusevski, I think about that Arsenal game, how many times Saliba got in front of Son to nip the ball away. And it's just so deflating watching it. And I think having that presence up there would have done a lot of players a world of good. And, it was an impossible game to watch. What with the lack, there didn't seem to be any half decent streams, but by all accounts, it seemed like Son, Maddison and Johnson all performed better than they had done previously. And I don't think that's a huge coincidence that there was a target man there.
How are you feeling? Where do you stand on Richarlison?
I would definitely not sell Richarlison.
Interesting.
Because, if someone offers 60 million quid, that's all very well. But I think we're going to need 2 proper number 9s going into next season with the volume of games we're going to have. And it's all very well selling Richarlison, buying Ivan Toney for the sake of argument, and that being that. But then what happens when Toney gets 5 bookings or, pulls a hamstring and misses a month? We don't have anyone else that you'd be comfortable playing 10 games in a row as a centre forward. And that's always the barometer that I try and put on players in the squad. Like, would I be happy with that person starting the next 10 league games for us? Or would I see that as a massive weakness? And I don't want to watch Son try and sort of hack away at being a centre forward anymore. So for me, Richarlison is a player that you would keep and buy someone else. And then you've got 2 proper number 9s. I mean, there aren't many teams that have got fewer than 2 players that can do a job through the middle. And I think the number of games we're going to have, it would be frustrating going into a year with 1 striker, I think.
You feel like it will be Ivan Toney. I think that seems to be who we will concentrate a lot of effort on this summer, right?
It seems sensible. And people are talking about Girassi and Jimenez and Openda. I've got no idea who these players are. But, if for example, you can get, Richarlison gets a ridiculous bid from Saudi and you can buy 2 strikers with that money, then fine. That might be a decision you have to make. But my red line is there have to be 2 strikers in the squad on August 31st. And given that we've signed about 1 half-decent striker in 15 years, and that's Richarlison, the thought of them having to sign 2 in a summer does give me the creeps slightly.
Because he is good. He's had a decent enough season. I probably look, if there's a gun to my head and I'm asked, if we get offered what we paid for him, would I take it? I probably would. Mm-hmm. But it's not that I don't disagree with what you're saying. there's that part. I also kind of flip to this idea that Spurs want to win the league. That's Ange Postecoglou's stated intention. That's what he wants to do. That's what he's trying to, inspire within this squad. And I kind of wonder, is Richarlison, does he make any of the top 5 squads or say starting 11s? I'm not sure he does. But then because I do have this internal tussle about it, because then I see games where, which game was it when did he come back for a half against, was it Arsenal? He came back for a half, North London derby at home, I think it was, wasn't it?
He played then and Chelsea and Liverpool. He played well against Liverpool, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And when he did come on, like you were saying, having that presence suddenly, having somebody up front that, because he does have that, for want of a better word, that shithousing kind of tendency about him as well. It is quite nice having that element to the team. And it does feel like it's, the thing ultimately for me is that I want to add somebody else before we consider letting him go.
Mm-hmm.
That would be 100% it. I know people have kind of gone a bit cold on even Tony lately, and I do get that, because it almost seems like a boring option, if you know what I mean. But I think if you do he's got a year left in his contract. I imagine Brentford would still want decent money, upwards of 50 million, isn't it? It's going to be 50, 60 or so, in that kind of ballpark. It's probably a wise investment, though. He's a really good player. I remember when we still had Kane, and the thought of Kane leaving was a possibility, I did look at Tony and think he has many kind of Kane type attributes in some ways. I think he is a bit of a fit, but maybe, dare I say, he's got a bit more physically about him than Kane had, that might see him fit. Although I don't buy for a second that Ange Postecoglou wouldn't have wanted to work with Harry Kane. I've never bought that. That was presented at the start of the season, right? That Kane won't fit an Ange system, that will be better without him, and all that type of stuff. Where it's funny, I hear many of the same voices now saying, well, Ange just had to cope without Harry Kane this season, which is an interesting one. But I quite like the idea of even Tony. I really do. I think he's, like I say, it's not fun. I get it. I know it's not fun, in the, quotation marks, to sign somebody from the Premier League that we've all seen, that we know is decent. There's always an element, people are drawn to the idea of, let's sign this guy from the Bundesliga who could come in and be incredible for us. But I think we've all seen how that one goes, don't we, Adam? Generally speaking, like when Spurs signed that, Vincent Janssen, I know it's not the Bundesliga, I know it's the Eredivisie, but the guy that's banging in goals in Europe, that should on paper be amazing and just isn't at all. So
the Richarlison winning the league point is interesting, because I would argue that you're not signing Richarlison to win you the league. You're not keeping Richarlison to win you the league. You're keeping Richarlison to keep the striker that you sign fresh enough to hopefully win you the league.
Yeah, fair.
Like the number of games that Kane had to slog away in nonsense cups because there was just no one else vaguely passable, and you're putting more minutes into already tiring legs. I just wonder if
anyone drop him though. Anyway, that's the problem.
I suppose that's true. I suppose that's true. But would you be happy going into the Europa League season with Valise as the guy leading the line? I think you'd be pretty terrified about what would happen there.
Yeah. What about Will Lancashire? We've heard good things about him, haven't we?
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
We've got embarrassment of riches. Look at us.
I know. I can't imagine Valise he's not going to play for Tottenham again, is he? I don't think. It's got that feel about it, I think.
If the abiding memory of him is Højbjerg passing to him when he ripped his leg in two, when he had Son clear for a one-on-one, then it's great memories that we've made there.
Let's it's the end of the season now. Obviously I keep making that point, and everyone will be for now. Let's try and wrap up the season as best as we can, and I thought I'd do this just in particular tabloid fashion of getting this down to bullet points, but bullet points that we can talk around, Adam. It's easy, isn't it? It's an easy thing to do. And what nicer place to start then in our review of 2023-2024 season, than asking you up top, who's your player of the season for Spurs? obviously.
I saw this question and I was mulling on it then, and I still am now. I think Romero has been the most impactful player
Yeah.
this season.
That's exactly where I went as well.
Yeah, there's been all of the starters. In a way, you could make a case for them, which might suggest there hasn't been a standout candidate. But in a lot of the games that we've won, there's been stuff that Romero has done from a leadership standpoint that has really taken him to another level this season. And I think he's been superb and probably, deserving of the award from Rule the Roost.
I think, given that, and there have been, I don't think it's just been people being wobble-headed. I do think there have been genuine, I say that because I was one of them. I do think there have been genuine concerns about his temperament, about his maturity or lack thereof. And whether it's been given the vice captaincy or whether it's just maybe just growing older, growing up a bit. I really do think he's managed to mostly keep himself in check this season, which is it's quite stark, really, because I think there's been times when most of us, and I really like Romero, I always have done, but he has left me pulling my hair out on occasions in the past where I just think, why are you still doing this stuff, man? Like, why are you still doing this? You're not playing Argentinian football anymore, where it's kind of lionized and people love all this kind of roughhousing. You know what it's like in the Premier League. You know what it's like in European football. You are going to get penalised this. But he really has snapped out of it. And like you say, it's not just that, though. Like, I think his ability as a player, he really has improved. And, of course, that's probably by and large down to the fact he's got an actual quality partner alongside him now as well, which I don't think we can probably understate Mickey van der Ven's impact on Romero's career to this point, right? And they seem to just have an instant partnership, don't they, as well, those two, which is good to see. Any notable mentions for you at all, mate, on this one?
Looking forward, I think we've got some absolute gems in Udogie and Sarr. I think they probably performed about as well as you could have hoped for two almost teenagers playing their first real season at the level. Porro's been consistently good. Goalkeeper hasn't let us down really at all. I think he's been unlucky with some of the set piece stuff that's probably got into his head a bit, but probably not entirely his fault. But I think everyone has contributed to where we've got to go. Son has been, he always is a bit mercurial, but I think overall he's taken the role of leader pretty well. Seems to be a quite popular captain. He's scored big goals when we've needed him to. And I don't think you can overestimate these mid-season competitions on players, how tolling they can be, especially when the whole sport isn't breaking like it was for the World Cup last season. To lose three really important players in Basuma, Sarr and Son to mid-season international competitions, none of whom came back successful. I think it's fair that should be seen as, if not an excuse, then at least a reason for perhaps the three of them not coming quite back at the same level, because that must take a real mental toll on you.
Here's the shitty one. Here's the one that people will say, why did you ask that one? Why did you talk about that? It's so negative. Who's been the disappointment of the season for you, mate?
Per expectation, probably Basuma. And I still think he's been pretty fine across the board. I think the structure of the team and not having the ability to hold the ball up front has been as much of a reason for his perceived drop-off. Well, no, it's not perceived. There has been a drop-off in his performances, but I don't think it's just been him that's been the issue. And I think as a disappointment, when players have been asked to come in and step up and replace players, the fact they've invariably then got themselves injured just from a squad standpoint, I found that quite disappointing. Like the number of times that Lo Celso or Davis or Richarlison, have been called upon and promptly got injured. I found that really disappointing, and that's probably stunted what we've been trying to do from can we put the same team out 3 weeks in a row? Almost never, because when one injury's come, that player's got themselves injured again. So that's a bit of a slightly dodging the question, I suppose, but I think it's something that's worth noting, that these injuries have just been such, stunters of what we've been trying to do.
Yeah, I had on mine Basuma dash Maddison, but a heavy caveat to both of them that they, Maddison's had what he's described as his worst injury of his career. Basuma did get malaria halfway through the season. And I think my overarching takeaway from this sort of thing is that I don't really think anyone's been massively disappointed. I think we're at the time of recording this, by the way, I don't know if you've seen James Maddison. It's just been announced he has been included in the England squad for Euro 2020. Well, the provisional squad so far, at least. So I think it's harsh to call it. He has been slightly disappointing, I think, at the tail end of the season, but he was brilliant at the start. He was really, really good and looked every bit the player we've been missing since Eriksen left, with more on top, dare I say, than Eriksen maybe ever had as well. Especially when I think about his directness, his close control, his ability to run at players, which kind of seemed to be missing a little bit in the second half of the season. But I think if he gets a decent rest in, has some time to recuperate this summer, which he may not now. He's in the England squad. We'll hopefully see enough play. There's definitely ability there, and I like I say, I don't think we're not looking back on this season, are we, and seeing another Lo Celso or Ndombele, are we really? That's comforting, I think, and that's another reason to be positive going forwards. You've already kind of touched on two of them, but who is your best young player of the season, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to really struggle to split Destiny and Star, so you can take one and I'll take the other. Assuming that is where you would also go with.
I've just about gone with Udogie.
Fine.
But it's I found it very, very. It's obviously between those two, and I think they're both exceptional. I really do. I haven't really been able to wrap my head around people not being fully behind Sarr, because for a player as young as he is in the position that he occupies on the pitch, to show not only the maturity but the quality that he has done consistently, both defensively, attacking, carrying the ball, breaking the lines, looking for good passes, not being afraid to have a shot from outside the box every now and again. It's so refreshing to see. And I think he's going to be a brilliant talent. But there's something about Udogie just being halfway close to. It's suddenly now having Porro and Udogie. We're suddenly looking at this thing like, finally, we've kind of replaced Walker and Rose at last. And it's not easy. This is the thing. It is seen as so easy, isn't it, to replace players of their quality? But Kyle Walker's gone on to win 4. Well, how many? Yeah, has he? No, he's won 6 Premier Leagues under Pep. Has he? Or 5? Yeah. 5 or 6. And obviously Danny Rose was probably coming towards the end of his career anyway at the time there, but was still a magnificent talent in that Pochettino team. So it was never going to be easy to replace those two. But
it's also hard to replace players that you stumble into in Walker and Rose. Like Spurs didn't target Walker and Rose and say, these are our fullbacks for the future. I mean, God knows if Walker or Norton was the one that they really wanted from Sheffield United, and Danny Rose was picked up from Leeds as a 16-year-old winger. So it's almost more difficult to replace players that there's no process in how you sign them in the first place.
That's a very good point. I'm gonna put this one to you, mate, as I'm putting them all to you. Best game / performance of the season for Spurs.
I thought away at Arsenal we were superb for pretty much the majority, and that might be a game where you look back and think, could we have kicked on and tried to win it? I know he took Son and Maddison off with about 15 minutes to go. I think probably because they were carrying something. I thought that was a great performance. Villa in the second half obviously was a really good performance. They've sort of been 10 or 15 minute clusters of magic this year, haven't there, as opposed to sustained 90-minute efforts. And Ange made quite an interesting point after Crystal Palace, I think, when he said that, if you score 3 goals in the first 50 minutes and win 3-1, everyone thinks that's comfortable. Well, but we scored 3 goals in the last 15 minutes, and people think we're nervous. It doesn't really bother me when we score the goals, and I kind of see something in that when we've got a full bench, the way in which we want to play, we can grind teams down with being able to field 16 players of high quality and high intensity. And I think that United game at the start of the season when he brought on players like Davis, Perisic, Højbjerg, none of them are brilliant players, but they were players that if you give them half an hour, they can give you a real burst of energy. I thought we lost a lot of that after that first spate of injuries and absentees, that we were never really in that position where we could bring on fresh quality players to do a job. We lost that ability to keep guys back as role players, and we had to have guys that were starting games like Højbjerg. I think the stats been doing the rounds of games lost and won with him starting, and they're pretty damning, to be honest. But he was a good role player. We seem to approach games in these sort of half an hour spurts of energy, and it'd be great if that can be sustained over a longer period of time next season.
Yeah. I had Arsenal down as well. I don't know if it's just the rivalry kind of overtaken, but I think that's all part of it, right? I think that's relevant. I think showing up at their gaff when they are as good as they are, loath as I am to say that, and matching them, if not bettering them for large parts of the game, I think it humbled them a little bit that day, actually. It's nice. It's nice to know, isn't it, that they missed out on the league by 2 points.
And Son scoring that goal from that position that he's never going to miss a chance from. Obviously, it's just not in his nature to miss from there. So it's perfect. But look, don't tell Barney Rone. But it is quite important to go to your rivals and put in a good result, and a good performance.
Or Henry Winter, or anything else like that. I mean, no, let's not. I won't dive into that one yet. Maybe at the end or something. Quite a few contenders to this one, mate. What do you think has been Spurs' goal of the season?
I think you've got something down as best moment as well, haven't you? And so I'm going to kind of combine them because I don't think there's been like a worldy goal. But for me, the best goals are when you can see a goal happening 3 or 4 passes beforehand. And like when cold heads prevail in the highest tension moment, I just find that completely enthralling. So for me, and it was from 2 yards away, but the move that we put together for Johnson's winning goal against Brighton,
nice.
I just thought was brilliant. And there were 4 or 5 passes that all had to be to the millimetre perfect for that goal to happen. And footballers, a myth. We love footballers and we think they're amazing. But the thing that always amazes me is that, in the heat of the moment where it really matters, can you just go back to your basics and do the right thing? And for the way that goal was scored, Richarlison's layoff and Maddison's pass and Son's cross, I just thought that was enthralling to watch players at the peak of their powers do that.
A couple of other notes on that theme. Son away at Crystal Palace was a similar one as well. Like you say, those sort of series of passes, a lovely little cushioned header from Brennan Johnson, Maddison working really hard in there to kind of putting it on a plate for him. Lovely stuff. A couple of rockets, Van de Ven against Nottingham Forest at home, obviously. We had Porro in the FA Cup against Burnley, which was a beautiful goal, especially when you watch that back on the replays now, the way it floats into the corners, lovely. Porro against Sheffield United the other day, what a hit, unbelievable. But like you say, none that are really kind of. I think the closest one to like being a real like knock your socks off goal was Porro in the FA Cup against Burnley. But the well worked ones are lovely. So the moment of the season, I'll go in with this one then. If you're saying that was your moment of the season, because I put it more as I meant it more as in like an overall like when do you think something big significant did happen within the season? I've got here the Chelsea home game, which I think is kind of the tale of 2 seasons, isn't it, as people will say, because that game, there's such a sliding doors moment there, isn't there, of Son's goal that was just a real whisker offside, if at all. If that gets given, how does that game end? Do we still get those injuries? I don't know. And this is going to be one of those big questions because Spurs were absolutely flying at that point. And again, it's them. Again, it's Chelsea. It reminds me of kind of Battle of the Bridge. We go 2-0 up, and I think we're still in the title race. We're still in there. I know we're hanging on. Leicester are probably going to do it, but we're still in it. And then obviously it completely flipped. And the same thing kind of happened here, didn't it? Like Spurs, where were we? I think at that point I wanted to say we were about 4 points clear at the top of the table or something.
Yeah, it must have been there or thereabouts.
Maybe people had a game in hand on us, but I do want to say we were 3, 4, maybe even 5 points clear at the top. Absolutely flying. And the could we, will we stuff started to almost feel a little bit more real, didn't it, at that point, which, maybe more for us. It was early on in the season, but we were absolutely sublime up until that point. And the second half of the season, wasn't as good. We did seem to default back to not in the way in which these results were achieved wasn't the same as it was under Conte. But what I mean is that it kind of reverted back to what we've seen in the past few years, in that Spurs were almost grinding out results purely on the basis that we were the team that had better players. So it would stand to reason that we would beat a lot of the teams that we did end up beating in the second half of the season. But I never really felt like, for the majority of it, we ever really exerted ourselves on anybody. It never really felt like we got much of that verve or that belief back that we had in the top end of the season before that Chelsea game. And so it will always be a bit of a, what could have been type moment. But I think it is also worth having the context, isn't it, that it was still pretty early on in the season, and Manchester City are ridiculous, and Arsenal are pretty ridiculous at the moment as well, which is horrible to say, but they are. And they hopefully won't only get better. I am hoping that this could be, next season might be their equivalent of us 17-18 season, first year at Wembley when they were good, but not quite at the same level. Depends who they add, doesn't it? But, I don't know. Anything you want to add in any of that at all, mate?
I've just been there. I've got 3 more, actually. 2 of them are very Spurs football related, but Kulusevski's last minute goal against Sheffield United.
Yeah.
Whoever you're playing against, that's an amazing moment. And something that's been forgotten, like Matic blasting one into the top corner in the 98th minute was an amazing moment. It was chaos in the stadium that evening. It just started to get dark because it was a later kickoff and it was entering October, and the tension of that game down to 9 men, you're thinking, oh my God, how can we possibly balls this up?
And it felt like we hadn't ever beaten them before as well, didn't it? It'd been so long.
Been ages. That was amazing. And then on a slightly more personal level, Isaac Kimes, who a lot of people probably interact with on social media, he has been a massive Spurs fan for a number of years, Korean American, and he came over from Nashville to watch his first ever game in March, and we met for the first time, having spoken for years and years, and Son scored the winner against Luton in the last minute. And I just think there's some romance to sport still left in there, and that was just such a beautiful moment for him to be a part of, to make the trip after years and years and see your guy do that for your team like that. That's just amazing. So there's not enough sort of micro moments in football anymore, but that really did resonate with me quite a lot.
Just whilst we're on it, because it's doing the rounds again at the moment, where do you stand on the celebrating Sheffield United at home after Kulusevski's goal?
Do it.
It's getting wheeled out now, isn't it? Look at Tin Pot Spurs.
Who cares? Very few clubs, if any, maybe apart from one that we all know, manufacture that sort of stuff. That was as an organic a thing as you could see. It wasn't an announcement from Paul Coy over the speaker, let's all stay in our seats so that we can wheel the kids out and have a big celebration. That was a purely organic, natural moment that the fans and the players felt between each other. And God, how miserable do you have to be to start denigrating that?
Yeah, I mean, that's just how it goes, isn't it? Right. Kits. How have you felt about Spurs kits this year? Decent year, a vintage year for Tottenham Hotspur Football Club kits?
I love the all white. I love the all white, and I really like the all navy. The Baba Ganoush one, obviously, the less said about that, the better. But for me, if our kits were all white, all navy, and all yellow every year, and they never changed it, I'd be thrilled. I mean, I've seen these rumours of these pajamas they're wheeling out for next season with horror, with these blue
you're not
sleeves.
a fan of it?
No.
I don't mind it. I don't mind. I prefer. Look, I'll put it this way. I prefer it to. Which year was it? I think it was COVID year with the yellow lightning bolt type things horrible. On it. Yeah, horrendous. But I'm with you. Big fan of them. The putty third kit. I'll never be on board with that. And I think the point was made actually on Twitter a fair bit that it blends in with the crowd too much.
Yeah,
and I don't actually know what the stats are as to how well or not Spurs performed in that kit, but just off the top of my head, I can't really remember us ever playing well in that one actually. So
I think we beat Luton in it, and that was the only win that we had wearing it.
That was scraped as well, wasn't it? Really, that was skin of our teeth. So no more putty kits, Tottenham Hotspur. So reflecting on this season, mate, what are the biggest green shoots for you? What gives you the most hope for next season and the future in general of Spurs?
I think top-level football has got to a point, particularly in league play, where you either play the right way, in inverted commas, or you don't. And I think that's probably why you're not seeing teams bending over backwards anymore to try and get Mourinho and Conte to be their manager. Because if you're not playing front foot progressive football, it just makes it so much harder to win. And you look at most of the champions around Europe now, they're playing football in a much more progressive front foot way. The counter-attacking game is not really there. So from the doldrums of the previous 4 or 5 years of what we were being force-fed, albeit there was some good times during Conte's reign where it sort of clicked into gear and everything worked perfectly and teams played right into our hands. I think the fact that Spurs have transferred themselves into such a progressive front foot looking team is encouraging, especially, go to all these games. I don't want to turn up to football and not be excited about what I'm going to watch. It's nice to go to football and know that you're going to see a team playing in the right way. And in conjunction with that, we've got loads of good players now. The general quality of the squad. I think I posted the 11 that we played in the North London derby, what will be 18 months ago, last January when we lost 2-0. And it is a shambles of a team. So to be where we are, a year later, I think is really optimistic, and hopefully they've got some sort of structure in place whereby the recruitment's going to be better. I know we say this every summer, and invariably it doesn't go as planned, but I think there's a lot to look forward to at Spurs. Probably this is as optimistic as you can be about Spurs since probably the end of 16-17.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite put us on that level. But
not on that level, but in terms of the last time you were this looking forward to next season.
Maybe more like post Leicester season, perhaps, I think. Because honestly speaking, after 16-17, I thought Spurs are maybe going to win the league next year, potentially, or we are going to in the next few years. I'm still not quite sure where we are yet.
No, as in, all I'm saying is that this is the most optimistic I've been about going into another season since then. I'm not saying that, I'm not expecting 17 home wins or anything like that again. And, I just, on my Facebook memories popped up that today was the anniversary of when we beat Hull 7-1 away. Like, I'm not saying that we're on that level yet, but from a foundational standpoint of what to look forward to, I think every other summer we've gone into it with various caveats that make you panic a little bit, whether it's Kane's going to leave or what's happening with where are we going to be playing our football next season, or is the manager right?
That's
I think there's a lot in place now that you haven't got many things to worry about this summer, unless you worry that the whole thing's not right, in which case, fine, I can't argue with that. But if you're on board, I think there's a lot to be pretty optimistic about.
Still though, Adam, that gives me a nice YouTube thumbnail, doesn't it? This is as good as we've been since 16, 17.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Have
better.
Your
This
face
is
on the thumbnail.
the best we've ever been.
Yeah.
Perfect.
You can draw it in and people can just leave the comment. You're deluded
Yeah.
without even watching it.
Yeah.
That's how it works. That's how content works, mate. So,
That's the media, baby.
You've just you've just given me that in, or that out. Either way, red flags. What do you think concerns you the most from what you've seen this season about this project, if you like?
I think it would be foolish to suggest that it's, after all I've just said, it might still just not work. And it might be that all of the people that have criticised Postecoglou pretty relentlessly for 6 months and, it's how we play, mate, just wheeled all that stuff out, which I found pretty boring myself. But they might be right. And it might be a case that we end up in October, November trying to play the same way and we're not good and he gets sacked. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. But I think it would be arrogant to just dismiss the views of thousands and thousands of, or maybe it's hundreds of people, maybe it's tens, and it's just they're the loudest ones on social media. But there would appear to be enough of a group of people that don't think what Spurs are doing and how they're trying to play is correct. So I guess the red flag would be that they're right. I don't think they will be. And I think that by improving the quality of the players that Spurs have will only raise the level of how we play as a team. And, a few good players, it's rising tides lift all boats as far as I'm concerned with how this squad should go. But I guess if you have a red flag, it would be that, or maybe, no, I think that would probably be it. That maybe it is all Emperor's New Clothes, and I'm watching it in awe. I don't think it is, but that would be the only red flag that I could think of at the moment.
I know what you mean, because I've toiled with the idea of us being a bit, especially in sort of some of the bleaker moments towards the end of the season when I've probably been more pissed off after the, in the wake of a game when you have that more emotional reaction up front to it. And I toy with that idea of have we been a bit found out? And I've never said it as a definitive statement. I've just kind of wondered if that is a thing, if that is a possibility, if maybe Postecoglou has underestimated the strength of the Premier League. All these type of things that toil around in my head. But I think it does seem really obvious to say, doesn't it? But like you say, when you add better players into it, I mean, we finished 5th this year.
Yeah.
We've done pretty well, really. Chelsea spent a lot of money. I know they did actually end the season pretty strong. I actually think they will. Maybe it's still my soft spot for Pochettino that, I'm just begrudgingly still have, maybe somewhere subconsciously. But I do think they've ended the season quite well. I think they will probably be back next year. If Palace hold on to even Elise and Eze, will they be a Brighton next year? Will they be somebody trying to muscle in on the top 6? I know it sounds crazy to say, but they've ended the season very well. They look very, very good. And those two are just phenomenal players. But then you think, you add those two to Spurs right now. And I suddenly do start thinking, well, it doesn't really matter if somebody's found us out, if somebody knows how Tottenham play. It doesn't mean you can stop what we can do. And you were, to your point, sort of toward the start of the podcast, there's so many games when we've seen us go into, say, a game with Werner, Johnson, Son up top, and we create a lovely move and it just breaks down in the final third. And I think even when we haven't been great at the tail end of the season, one of the big green shoots for me has been that I've still seen Spurs knocking the ball about nicely. You still see those little clips drop on Twitter of like Ange's cooking something, and you'll have seen, and you're like, I completely missed that in the flow of the game. I don't really know how I didn't see that, but then there you go. We've knocked it. We've taken the ball from defence. Van de Ven's knocked it up to Basuma, who's laid it off. We're about 4 or 5 passes, and we're in the opposition half and in a decent place, and then it generally breaks down because Werner's got on the end of it, or the ball to Johnson hasn't been particularly great or something like that. But then when we start considering if we have better players in that final third, if we maybe add some more quality, we might have already done that in having Bergwall in the team. Maybe he can be part of that missing link. Who knows? But I think if the direction of travel is that we keep adding players to this team, I'm pretty confident that we haven't been found out. But like I say, even if we have, everybody can sit down, right? Everybody can sit down and say, we know what Pep Guardiola does. We know what Jurgen Klopp's done for the past few years. But the problem has been stopping them doing that. And I do think that Spurs, with some better players, can. Again, this isn't the soundbite. I'm not saying we're going to be as good as Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. I'm saying we can be one of those teams that is just different, like Arsenal are, that are just tough for opposition teams to stop because they are really good and they've got good players suited to the positions that they're playing in, suited to the system that they're playing in. And we're still a work in progress on that front. I did have one red flag, and I've sort of said it in the past couple of weeks. And again, yes, I'm having a sort of little dig at Postecoglou. I think my only little red flag with him is I think he's a little bit thin-skinned. He's actually surprised me with how thin-skinned he's been at certain points, because I think he's come to a team the size of Spurs, and whatever, rival fans scoff as much as you like, but a team that it does occupy a certain space within the media that is going to get a certain level of coverage more so than many other teams in the league or country are going to. There's going to be a level of pressure. There's going to be a level of, press inquiry about certain things. And I think the way him getting particularly prickly about just being asked pretty straightforward questions about Spurs being in the top four, didn't really handle that one very well. This stuff with Manchester City, I think has been a car crash from him. I do, but I can move past it and whatever. But I'm dying on the hill that he's handled it really badly. I think the Manchester City thing, and I know
for what it's worth.
Yeah, I know a lot of people disagree with that, but like I say, it's the hill I'm dying on. And there was another one as well. There is another one that he kicked off about. I can't. It will come to me, and I've said it previously on here. But I think there's been just a few minor things that he's gotten just a bit shirty about, and the wake of the Manchester City game, the kind of fragile foundation stuff, the kind of echo of Conte, I guess, that we're feeling. I don't want to see too much of that stuff. Like, if he's had a bad day, like, I think for somebody that talks about kind of professionalism, talks about doing things in a certain way, I would be disappointed. He doesn't even have to say it publicly, but I'd be disappointed if he doesn't himself think, I could have done a bit better there. I did kind of mess up there, and that's probably not the way to have handled that situation, And I think that's the only red flag from me, that he's just, maybe bring that stuff down a notch a little bit, because he's had a lot of support from the Spurs fan base this year. He's had unwielding support from the whole stadium singing his name for even when the results have been bad. And I think he has been backed by the club to this point. I think he's been given a decent amount of money. He's been given some decent players for the first year of a project. So, I just don't want him to fall into that habit of coming across maybe a bit ungrateful in a way. But it's conflicting, because I know in my own head, and this is something I've been saying, is that at the same time, maybe what we need to stop the rot. It's been a long time since we've won something now at Spurs, and we do need to stop that rot. We say this every year, but we do need that League Cup, that FA Cup, that Europa League next year. We need that. We need to instill a bit more pride back in the club with the supporters. We need to get a bit more respect from the press and that type of stuff. Maybe we need this type of guy who doesn't acquiesce, who is like, nope, I'm right, and we got to win, and you guys are losers. Much as we don't like it, but maybe that's the type of personality, at least, that is required at this level. So that's what I'll say. So on him then, mate, out of 10, how do you think Postecoglou has done? How would you rate Postecoglou out of 10 for his first season at Tottenham Hotspur?
I said 8.5 on Sunday, which may have been, we got a bit of pushback, so maybe I should, wind it down to an 8 or something. But again, my response would be that when Kane was sold, who was out there saying that Spurs would come 5th? or even come close to that. There was far more talk about bottom half than there was about top five, I would say. And maybe I'm sort of twisting what actually happened because it helps fit my narrative, but I genuinely cannot recall anyone tipping Tottenham to be competitive, in and around the Champions League spaces this season. And I think with all the upheaval, having to bring in so many players that are either in their first season at the club or their second season, but first year of playing, I don't know that he could have been asked or expected to do much, much more than he has done.
I pretty much agree with you. I sort of got 7.58. So, yeah, I think, like I say, as soon as the spectre of Arsenal winning the league or the Champions League disappeared, it was easier to reflect on actually what was a good season for Spurs.
And if like 3 or 4 clubs had done better in Europe, we'd be sat here in the Champions League because of the coefficient. And I think that would change. People will be talking about at least 8.5. He's got us back in the Champions League in his first season, having lost Harry Kane. All these young players, all those injuries. And so, I'm not going to let that narrative sort of change my opinion too much. I'm just going to try and look at it as I see it. And I think that we're equally deserving of that praise because of what they've done, even though, the stuff out of our control hasn't fallen our way.
And finally, what mark do you give? Because they're pretty closely linked, so it might be the same. But what mark do you give Spurs overall? Manager, players, fans, club, all of it. What do you give the 23-24 season out of 10?
Yeah, I'd probably go with 8 again. I think it was a massive error not buying another centre-half last summer, and it might be the error that's cost them 100 million quid by not qualifying for the Champions League, if that's the sort of stuff that they look at. But, it was always going to be a risk that one of your centre-halves would miss a bit of a few games. Unfortunately for them, both of them missed about 5 in the space of 2 months, which perhaps is unforeseen. But, leaving the squad with 2 really capable centre-halves was something that was disappointing. Could they have done a bit more in January? I don't want it to become sort of like just a transfer, everything obsessed with recruitment and whatever. But I think overall, everyone's been pulling in the same direction for the first time in a long time. The stadium's been a much more enjoyable place to be on a regular basis. And yeah, I feel like just generally much more uplifted about Spurs than I have done for a long time. And that would probably lend me to giving a pretty high mark on that.
I guess just to close this one off then, mate, and this isn't a rating or anything like this, just a chance to ask you, what do you, I guess, hope - expect for Spurs next year? What do you want to see happen? What do you think is achievable for us? What would you like to see? Obviously, I know you want to see Spurs win the double next year, but what do you think we can realistically expect, and what would you like to see?
Yeah, I've always said with the domestic cups, you never know if you're going to get Man City away in the first round. So that's, when you say, we have to win a cup, that's the sort of thing that can come in the way, and just kibosh that at the outset. I do think the Europa League is a competition that we should have designs on being competitive in. There is that guillotine of Chelsea now being in it that's sort of seemingly dangling over my neck straight away in a rather terrifying manner, that I can see myself going to Bilbao and losing in the final to Pochettino's Chelsea. I'm not sure I can think of anything worse than that. But, we wouldn't be the fatalists that we are if we didn't have that circled in the diary already. And I think next year that we need to be expected to be much closer to the top 3 than we have been this year, particularly given the great start that we had. I think it's perfectly fair to give Pochettino a lot of leeway last year in dealing with everything. But equally, I think that 2 years of stable management is plenty of time to turn things around, as long as you're backed properly and you get the players in that you want to, which seems like it will happen. Ange was probably the most positive I've ever heard of a manager talking about Spurs, saying he's been given everything that he wants. And he said that 2 or 3 times in the last month. So, I think next year is when it would be much more fair to be to give more of a critique on Postecoglou and how it's going, and we should be expecting to be much closer to the top 3 and hopefully have a decent run in the cups, I would say.
and hope that we're not welcoming Thomas Tuchel in as our new manager come kind of October, November time. Right?
Exactly.
Please, no top. No more Chelsea managers, ex-Chelsea managers, please. But right, it's been a pleasure, mate. Thanks very much for coming on, and have a good summer, mate.
Thank you. It was always a pleasure. Love being on. Thanks a lot.
Actually, enjoy tomorrow. We didn't even talk about the pre-season ridiculous friendly that we're doing tomorrow, but there we go. You know,
the big one.
Yeah, it all rides. It all rides on this. Postecoglou, if we don't win this, mate, he's gone. Get him out.